Before the world knew emperors, before marble cities rose and collapsed, before the name Rome struck fear into the hearts of kings, there was only a river and a legend. On the banks of the Tiber River, under a sky that seemed indifferent to human ambition, two abandoned twins cried for survival. According to legend, they were Romulus and Remus, sons of a fallen king, left to die by those who feared their bloodline. Fate, however, had other plans. A she-wolf, driven not by mercy but by instinct, nursed them. From this fragile beginning would rise the greatest empire the world had ever known, and from that same soil, it would one day crumble into dust. This is not just the story of an empire. This is the story of power, how it is born, how it corrupts, and how it destroys even the mightiest of civilizations. Rome did not begin as a grand idea. It began as a necessity. In the 8th century BCE, Italy was a fractured land. Small tribes fought endlessly over farmland, water, and honor. Survival depended not on ideals, but on strength, loyalty, and violence. The early Romans were not philosophers or artists, they were fighters. Farmers who became soldiers when the harvest failed. Men who learned early that peace was temporary, but war was inevitable. Romulus, the legendary founder, did not create Rome through diplomacy. He killed his own brother to claim supremacy. That single act would echo through Roman history for centuries. Rome would always believe that greatness required sacrifice, sometimes even of blood. The early city was poor, crude, and surrounded by enemies. Yet Rome possessed something rare, an unbreakable belief in itself. Where others fought for glory, Rome fought for survival. Where others conquered and destroyed, Rome absorbed. Defeated enemies were not always enslaved. Many were made citizens. This policy would become Rome's greatest weapon. As Rome grew, so did its hunger. Kings ruled first, but Romans hated kingship. The memory of tyranny burned deep. When the last king was overthrown, Rome did something revolutionary. It created a republic. Power would be divided. No single man would rule. Laws would matter more than bloodlines. Or so they believed. The Roman Republic was built on ideals: duty, honor, discipline, and service to the state. Senators debated endlessly, while armies marched relentlessly. Rome expanded not because it wanted to rule the world, but because every victory created new enemies, and every enemy demanded another war. War became Rome's economy. Conquest became its identity. As centuries passed, Rome swallowed Italy, then Carthage, then Greece, then Gaul. Each victory brought wealth, slaves, and glory, but also corruption. Farmers lost their land. Generals gained private armies. Senators grew rich while the poor crowded into the city, angry and desperate. Rome was winning the world and losing itself. And somewhere in this chaos, ambitious men began to realize a terrifying truth. The Republic was weak, and power was waiting to be taken. The Republic, in theory, was a beacon of freedom. Power rested in the hands of the Senate and the people. Yet behind the marble columns and echoing forums, Rome was a powder keg of ambition, envy, and betrayal. Every consul, every senator, every general carried a hunger that could not be sated by law alone. And law, fragile as it was, often bent to the will of those with armies at their backs. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had conquered almost the entire Mediterranean world, but conquest came with a cost. Soldiers returned home with nothing. The lands of the conquered were divided among the elite. Ordinary Romans crowded into the city, living in cramped apartments above shops, while patricians, the aristocrats, feasted on imported grain, wine, and exotic delicacies from across the empire. The divide between rich and poor, between the powerful and the powerless, widened like a scar on the city's soul. In this restless climate, a man named Gaius Julius Caesar emerged. He was not born to greatness, but made himself a symbol of it. Caesar's cunning, charm, and brutality were legendary. In a world where wealth and connections mattered, he combined them with ambition. Caesar conquered Gaul, not merely for glory, but for power. Every campaign brought him fame, treasure, and loyalty from an army that owed more to him than to the Republic itself. But Rome did not welcome such a concentration of influence lightly. The Senate, terrified that one man might overthrow the Republic, plotted endlessly. Alliances were forged and broken with terrifying speed. Political violence became routine. Every speech in the forum was both a declaration of ideals and a battle for survival. Yet Caesar was unrelenting. He crossed the Rubicon River with his legions in 49 BCE, a literal point of no return. "The die is cast," he reportedly said. That simple phrase signaled the end of the Republic and the beginning of an empire. Rome descended into civil war. Brothers fought brothers, senators faced generals, and the streets of the city ran with fear and blood. Yet amid the chaos, Caesar's genius shone. He combined military strategy with public spectacle, winning not only battles but the hearts of the people. When he returned to Rome, triumphant and unstoppable, Caesar did what no Roman had dared in centuries. He assumed absolute power. He reformed laws, redistributed wealth, and centralized authority. He was celebrated as a hero, yet whispered about as a tyrant. And in 44 BCE, on the Ides of March, the Senate struck, stabbing Caesar to death in a conspiracy meant to restore freedom. They failed. Caesar's death did not restore the Republic. It ignited a chain reaction that would plunge Rome into decades of civil war. His adopted heir, Octavian, later Augustus, would ultimately rise above the chaos, not as a king in name, but as the first emperor. The Republic, with all its ideals of shared power, was gone. In its place, Rome learned a new lesson, that ambition, if cunning and patient, could dominate even the greatest democracy. Yet even as Augustus forged the empire, Rome's story was far from over. The city would reach unprecedented heights: the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the aqueducts, roads spanning continents. Roman law, engineering, and culture would shape the world for millennia. And yet, lurking beneath the grandeur was a truth Rome would never escape. Power corrupts, pride blinds, and all empires, no matter how mighty, carried the seeds of their own destruction. The streets of Rome gleamed like no city the world had ever known. Marble columns soared into the sky, fountains sparkled in the sunlight, and the roar of the Colosseum carried the cheers of tens of thousands. Augustus had transformed Rome from a city of chaos and civil war into the shining heart of an empire. Peace, Pax Romana, reigned, at least on the surface, and for the first time in centuries, Romans could walk their streets without fear of swords in the night. The Golden Age was intoxicating. Rome's emperors, beginning with Augustus, were both gods and men. Temples, theaters, and baths were built not just for the people, but as monuments to the glory of the state. Art and literature flourished. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, a story that connected Rome's past with its imperial destiny. Roads and aqueducts spanned the empire, bringing water, trade, and soldiers to distant provinces. The empire seemed eternal. Yet, beneath the grandeur, the foundations were shifting. The very success that had made Rome invincible planted seeds of decay. The rich grew richer, feeding their appetites with luxury imported from Egypt, India, and China. Palaces overflowed with gold, silks, and exotic animals. Feasts lasted days, while the poor squeezed into insulae, cramped apartment blocks where disease and fire were constant threats. The army, once the backbone of Roman discipline, began to change. Soldiers were paid lavishly, and loyalty often lay more with generals than with the Senate or the state. The emperors themselves were a paradox. Augustus, shrewd and patient, understood power and maintained a delicate balance between authority and the illusion of the republic. Tiberius, his successor, became increasingly paranoid, retreating to Capri while political enemies disappeared in the shadows. Caligula indulged in cruelty and madness. Claudius, surprisingly effective, expanded the empire into Britain, but was manipulated by those closest to him. Nero, the most infamous of all, watched Rome burn while fiddles, though perhaps only metaphorically, sounded in the night. And yet, the empire endured. Provinces thrived under Roman law, trade expanded across the Mediterranean and beyond, and Roman culture dominated the known world. But cracks were forming where the citizens could not see. Political corruption, reliance on mercenary armies, and the erosion of traditional civic duty slowly weakened the core of the empire. Empires, the historians would say later, do not fall in a day, but they crumble when the people forget that power comes with responsibility, not just privilege. By the 2nd century CE, Rome had reached the height of its power. Emperors like Trajan and Hadrian consolidated territories, built monumental architecture, and maintained the illusion of unbreakable strength. Yet the seeds of decay sown during the Republic, nourished by luxury and ambition, continued to grow unseen. Generals became politicians, citizens became spectators. The machine of Rome was magnificent, but its engine was losing oil. And soon, that very engine would roar and sputter, signaling the beginning of a slow, inexorable decline that would shake the world itself. Rome had reached heights that no civilization had ever imagined. Its territories stretched from the wind-swept hills of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt. Trade flowed like rivers of gold, soldiers guarded every frontier, and emperors ruled with a mixture of fear and awe. Yet even as Rome glittered in triumph, its foundations were quietly crumbling. The first cracks appeared in the heart of the empire itself, the people. Once proud citizens, active in politics in the defense of the Republic, had become spectators of their own empire. Bread and circuses kept them distracted, grain from North Africa, games in the Colosseum, gladiators fighting to the death for amusement. Civic duty was replaced by indulgence. The loyalty that had made Rome invincible faded into apathy. Emperors, too, were part of the decay. Commodus, son of the great Marcus Aurelius, turned the grandeur of Rome into his personal playground. He fought as a gladiator, indulged in excess, and ruled with vanity and cruelty. Political assassinations became common, succession uncertain, and each emperor's reign a gamble between genius and madness. The Senate, once the heart of Roman governance, was reduced to a ceremonial body, powerless against the whims of emperors or generals. Beyond Rome's gates, danger was growing. Barbarian tribes, the Goths, Vandals, Huns, and Franks pressed against the empire's borders. For centuries, Rome had absorbed outsiders, integrated conquered peoples, and relied on the discipline of its legions to maintain dominance. But by now, the army had changed. Mercenaries, loyal only to gold, replaced citizen soldiers. Discipline faltered. Borders weakened, and the barbarians, once seen as mere nuisances, became predators. The economy, too, faltered. Heavy taxation, inflation, and reliance on slave labor created instability. Wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, while the vast majority struggled to survive. Farms abandoned, cities overcrowded, and corruption endemic, the lifeblood of the empire began to thin. Rome, once a city of engineers and administrators, was now a city of chaos, ruled by fear and superstition. Yet the empire endured through sheer force of its history and infrastructure. Roads still connected distant provinces. Aqueducts still carried water to fountains and baths. Roman law and culture persisted. But time, ambition, and human folly were relentless. The very institutions that had built Rome, the Senate, the army, the civic spirit, were eroding, unable to withstand internal decay and external pressures at once. By the 4th century CE, the signs were undeniable. Emperors came and went with alarming speed. Civil wars tore through the provinces. Cities were sacked by invaders. The Eastern Empire, later known as Byzantium, began to rise in prominence, leaving the Western Empire increasingly vulnerable. Rome, once eternal, was learning a brutal lesson. No empire, no matter how mighty, can survive when its foundations rot from within. And yet, even in decline, Rome refused to vanish quietly. Its stories, triumphs, and tragedies were etched into the memory of the world. Generals like Stilicho and Aetius tried to hold the Western Empire together. Battles were fought with desperation, and yet the tide could not be stopped. History, relentless as a river, continued its course. The empire that had begun with 2 abandoned twins by the Tiber, nurtured by a she-wolf, and forged through war, politics, and vision, now faced its greatest enemy, time itself. And with that enemy, Rome would ultimately confront the reality that even the mightiest empires must fall. Rome, the eternal city, was dying. Not with a roar, but with 1,000 agonizing whimpers. By the late 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former glory. The streets that once rang with the footsteps of citizens, merchants, and soldiers now echoed with uncertainty. Governors fought for power, generals betrayed one another, and the barbarians pressed harder with each passing year. It began subtly. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, long kept at bay by Roman legions, sensed weakness. Rome, stretched too thin, could no longer defend its sprawling territories. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, entered the city, a city that had never fallen to a foreign army in over 1,000 years. The sack of Rome was devastating. Temples looted, palaces burned, treasures carried away. To Romans, it was unthinkable, almost apocalyptic. Yet this was only the beginning. The Western Empire, plagued by political instability and economic collapse, could not recover. Emperors were often mere children or puppets manipulated by powerful generals. Civil wars further drained the empire's strength. Mercenaries, once a tool for defense, now turned against their employers when gold ran out or loyalty shifted. In 455 CE, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. Their ships sailed up the Tiber, plundering the city with shocking efficiency. The glory of centuries seemed to vanish overnight. By 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a boy named almost ironically after the founder of Rome, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The Western Roman Empire had officially ended. But Rome's story did not vanish with the fall of its western territories. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for nearly 1,000 more years. Its capital, Constantinople, preserved Roman law, culture, and military strategy. Roman architecture, governance, and engineering influenced the world long after the legions disappeared from the West. Roads, aqueducts, and ruins stood as testaments to the ingenuity of a civilization that once ruled the known world. Rome's legacy is everywhere. Modern legal systems echo Roman law. Languages across Europe, Italian, Spanish, French, Romanian, bear the imprint of Latin. Cities are designed with Roman principles of urban planning. The idea of an empire, the notion that a state could span continents and endure centuries, was first fully realized by Rome. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson of all is not found in architecture or law, but in history itself. Even the mightiest empire is vulnerable to internal decay.
Wealth, power, and conquest can blind a civilization to the forces of corruption, mismanagement, and human ambition. Rome endured for over a millennium because it adapted, conquered, and inspired. But even Rome, with all its might and genius, could not escape the relentless march of time. And so the story of Rome, the rise, the brilliance, the excess, the decay, and the fall, remains the ultimate testament to human ambition and fragility. From two abandoned twins on the banks of the Tiber to the fall of the Western Empire, Rome teaches us that empires are built by vision and ambition, but sustained only by wisdom, discipline, and a people who believe in the ideals that created them. The ruins may crumble, the emperors may vanish, but the spirit of Rome, the lessons, the triumphs, and the warnings lives on, echoing across centuries, shaping the world long after the last legion marched into history.